All right, Dr. Gentile, we ready to proceed?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, and Ms. Hitt, you are ready to proceed, okay. All right, I want to call to order this meeting of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission Committee on Finance and Operations today, and I'll ask Ms. Hitt to call the roll.
Commissioner Matlock, Commissioner Rader,
Here.
Commissioner Stafford,
Present.
Treasurer Lillard,
Here.
Comptroller Mumpower. Treasurer, you have 3 members present.
Okay, so we have Mr. Rader, Commissioner Rader with us by phone today, and we appreciate his presence along with that of Commissioner Stafford, and we compose your quorum today. I just want to note for a minute, it's good to be here at the University of Memphis, Lambuth, especially since I'm a U of M graduate 2 times over, so that helps in the process, but it's been good to see some of the facilities today and meet some of the faculty and leaders of the campus here at the Lambuth campus of the University of Memphis. Next, we want to go to public comment. Dr. Gentile, do we have any public comment today?
No, Chairman, we have no public comment today.
All right, so we have no public comment, and the record and the minutes will note that. I'll ask if there's a report to be given on behalf of the committee and the chair. I don't have anything myself, but Vernon, do you have anything?
I do not.
Okay. All right.
Treasurer,
Yes.
I think we will need to do a statement of necessity.
Okay. All right. Okay, would you read the statement of necessity, Ms. Hitt?
Thank you, sir. Committee members, a quorum of members are participating electronically today. As such, Tennessee Code Annotated 844-108B2 requires that the committee make a determination that a necessity exists in order for a quorum of members to participate by electronic or other means of communication. A necessity means that the matters to be considered by a public body at a meeting require timely action by the body, that physical presence by a quorum of the members is not practical within the period of time requiring action, and that participation by a quorum of the members by electronic or other means of communication is necessary. In this case, 2 facts support a determination of necessity. First, today's agenda items require timely action by this committee to meet the commission's charge to develop a recommendation for the agenda items to be considered by the full commission on November 7th, 2024. Second, scheduling conflicts and other commitments prevented a quorum of members from being physically present today.
Okay, you've heard the statement of necessity. Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
All right, Commissioner Stafford moves it. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, Commissioner Rader seconds it. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Hitt, would you call the roll on the motion to adopt the statement of necessity?
Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.
Aye. All right, the item is adopted. Of course, those of you in the audience know the statement is required by state law in the event that we do not have a physical quorum present, but yet have a quorum through electronic communication means in order to conduct business. So we thank you for that. We'll go next to the approval of the minutes from August 15, 2024, the summer quarterly meeting. Are there any comments, questions, additions, deletions to the minutes?
Treasurer, I think we need to adopt the agenda first.
Okay, all right. We'll back up a minute. We'll go to adoption of the agenda. Does anybody have any comments on the agenda? All right, seeing none, the chair will move to adopt it. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, a second by Commissioner Stafford. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Hitt, would you call the roll on the motion to adopt?
Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.
Aye. All right, the agenda is adopted. Now we'll go to the minutes of August 15, 2024. Any additions, deletions, comments, et cetera, with respect to the minutes to be adopted? If not, Chair will move approval of the minutes.
Second.
We have a second by Commissioner Stafford. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Hitt, call the roll on the motion to adopt.
Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.
Aye. Okay, the item is adopted. Thank you for that item. We'll skip the chair's report right here at the moment then. We have an institution report. So,
Wait, did I give him the wrong one?
That was the wrong agenda. There we go. There we go. All right. Okay, next item would be on the regular calendar, which is the election of the chair of the committee. The floor is now open for nominations to the chair of the committee.
Mr. Chair, I would nominate our treasurer, David Lillard.
All right, we have a nomination. Is there a second for the nomination?
Second.
All right, Commissioner Rader seconds it. Any further nominations? Seeing none, without objection, nominations will cease, and we'll proceed to the election, assuming there is no discussion. Ms. Hitt, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Rader?
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford?
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard?
Aye. Okay, I guess I just helped elect myself to this full job an additional year, so. All right, I forgot to inquire whether there was an increase in salary in connection with this, but I doubt there is. 100%. Yeah, 100% of zero is still zero, yes. Commissioner Stafford's always been a good mathematician. All right, okay, the next item is item number 2 on the regular agenda, which is the consideration of the 2025-26 operating state appropriation recommendations. And with that, we'll have a presentation from staff on that matter. Yes, Mr. Van Zommerman. See, your mic's not on there. Here we go.
Take two.
All right.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the commission. I'm Russell Van Zomeren, Senior Director of Fiscal Policy, here to present the 2025-26 operating appropriation budget recommendation. Before I begin, I would love to say a few quick thank yous. As you all know, our budget process is relatively in-depth. We look at tens of thousands of data points. That's not just for our outcomes-based funding formula, but also for our specialized units.
Give me Matlock.
Is now joining.
Also for our specialized units and a host of our other budget requests. These data points drive our recommendation that you see before us today, but relationships also drive that. Many thanks to our partners at Finance and Administration, at the institutions, my staff, my team behind us, who have helped put about 4 months of work into the items you'll see before you today. THEC's vision under Dr. Gentile has been to cultivate a cohesive higher education enterprise which fosters innovative solutions, ensures student success, builds strong communities, and improves the lives of Tennesseans. We feel that the budget requests we're bringing before you today helps ensure that vision comes to reality. We'll talk through each of the items that we have for you, broken out into 5 major categories. We'll start with that $40 million to fund the outcomes-based funding formula, move on to the $2.3 million request for our specialized units, almost $72 million for statewide system priorities, about $12 million for the Tennessee Student Assistance Award, and then the $24.6 million for agency requests. On the agency requests, you actually heard from Amanda Clefane behind me on these items back in August, so I won't spend much time on them today, but of course, if you have questions, we can discuss them. Let's start with our outcomes-based funding formula discussion. It's a $40 million request. That's a decent bit larger than the $17 million request we brought before you last year. The biggest reason there is that our outcomes are improving again. Our outcomes are up almost 1%, and that coincides with this $40 million request. As a reminder, this does not include any money for salary, which flows through a separate process. This $40 million represents about a 2.5% increase in appropriations for our formula units. I mentioned those outcomes. I'm going to touch briefly on what we're seeing within the formula for this most recent year, and we'll start with the outcomes themselves at our community colleges. The first thing you'll see in the left column, that one-year change, how is the outcome doing relative to what it was doing a year ago? That column on the right will show you how that outcome is doing relative to 3 years ago, so 2020, 2021. And our progression metrics are rebounding from some of those pandemic dips. In fact, all 3 progression metrics are up in the community college sector. We're excited to see that. We also know dual enrollment's continuing to grow. We have now, I think, about 1 in 3 high school students is taking advantage of dual enrollment, some 50,000 students in this most recent academic year taking advantage of that dual enrollment grant. So that's been a huge boon for our students and also for our community colleges. And finally, the workforce training contact hours. We're up over 1.1 million contact hours for the most recent year. About a year ago, THEC's internal auditor, Doug Cullum, came to me And he said, I'd love to look at workforce training within the formula. And of course, I was excited for the opportunity to be audited. So thank you, Doug, for that chance. We spent the last year diving deep into these data, figuring out how we can build a more robust data system that really tells us what's happening in this non-credit space at our institutions. And so truly many thanks to Doug, to our partners at TBR, who have helped build out this data system that we have. I'll talk a bit later in the presentation about a request we have that I think could really take us to the next level. But what I know is that this most recent year, we had the most workforce training contact hours that we've had in the history of the formula, and also some of the best quality data that we've had in the history of the formula. We're really proud of that. Talk about focus populations also at the community college sector. And here we can see a few things. First, we're starting to regain some of those populations that we lost during the pandemic. When I came to you all this time last year, one of the concerns I expressed was not just that the outcomes had maybe stagnated a little bit, but particularly who they had stagnated or even declined for. Those students who were coming to our campuses as adults, as low-income students, students who may be underprepared as indicated by their ACT scores. We're making progress with those students again, which is something I'm excited to see. I also know we have a lot of work to do here. A decade ago, some 90% of our outcomes at the community colleges were triggered by students who were eligible for at least one focus population premium. Today, that number is closer to 80%, so it's a pretty significant drop to get back to where we were 10 years ago. Outcomes at the university, again, some optimistic stories here, progression metrics continuing to rebound from some of those pandemic dips, seeing growth not just in that one-year change, but also in the 3-year change. We've got strong investments in research and service. This most recent year, our institutions had about almost $500 million in expenditures on research and service, the most in the history of the formula. And finally, we know that our graduate awards are continuing to grow. Looking back, we had about 7,000 graduate awards in the master's section this year. That's up from about 5,500 a few years ago. Looking at doctoral and law degrees, we're up to about 1,300 per year, up from 1,200 a few years ago. Same thing at the universities with our focus populations, starting to see us regaining those populations that we might have gained, or that we might have lost, excuse me, during the pandemic. Also a very similar story to the community colleges. 10 years ago, some 62% of our outcomes were produced by students eligible for at least one focus population premium. Today, that number is closer to 50%. So we have a lot of work to do in this space. Of course, the formula ultimately spits out shares of funding that are allocated to each institution. At this point, the formula distributes about $1.6 billion in funding and appropriations. Each 1% then is worth about 16 million, 0.1, 1.6, and so on. I'll actually highlight our host institution here today as an example of how the funding formula can work to better our institutions and serve our state. The University of Memphis has had relatively stable enrollment over the period you see here, about 17,000 undergraduate students per year. Rather than maybe relying on continual growth in undergraduate enrollment, instead what we've seen the University of Memphis do is focus on increasing their efficiencies, really investing in research and service, increasing their graduate awards, all while maintaining that existing portfolio of undergraduate outcomes. What the formula has allowed the University of Memphis and allows all of our institutions to do is the opportunity to advance their unique strengths while also serving as a tool for the state to incentivize and recognize institutional successes and their investments in Tennessee. Moving on from the formula, I'll talk about our $2.3 million request for our specialized units. That number represents non-salary operating. Just like with the formula units, the salary flows through a separate process. For those of you who are new or who maybe, like I do, need a reminder what all is included in our specialized units bucket, you can see that on the screen here before you, also in your materials. In general, any entity that is not included within that traditional formula, you'll see up here, we're talking about our medical units, space institutes, public service centers, so on and so forth. Speaking of our medical units, I'll highlight $1.6 million of that $2.3 million request. And an example of the partnerships I opened my remarks with. We've spent the last year or two working with finance and administration, working with the institutions to really hone in on what are those things that drive costs at our medical units, simplifying that medical unit formula to identify those cost drivers and use it to drive funding. We're really proud of this work. I think we've got a lot of buy-in from our partners, both at the institutions and at Finance and Administration, for a new model that we think is going to be sustainable for years to come. On strategic initiatives, we have about $72 million in strategic initiatives for statewide system priorities. I'll walk through them briefly. They are, of course, in your materials. First, we have land grant matching at Tennessee State University. TSU receives 3 different federal grants, each requiring a 1-to-1 match. The funding request you see before you today would increase that recurring base to a 2-to-1 match, allowing TSU to further serve the many students and Tennesseans who are reliant on these various services that the 3 entities you see before you provide. Again, for our medical units, one of the things that we know in talking with our medical units is that updated equipment might be one of the most important things that they can offer to students. Students are going out into the field. They need to be able to work with the various tools that they're going to be working with in the field while they're on campus. And so we have a request before you today. What we hope this request will do, is update every piece of equipment that is older than 10 years old at our medical units. Specialized units, you should be familiar with the first request for the College of Pharmacy. 2 years ago, the College of Pharmacy became a specialized unit by virtue of gaining access to public appropriations. This request would put them on par with other specialized units, receiving about 60% of appropriations, of their overall operating through appropriations.
I'm going to give Russell a chance to drink some water. The history with the College of Pharmacy goes back about 20 years. The state allowed, and THEC led on allowing ETSU's College of Pharmacy to open on the condition that there wouldn't be state funding for College of Pharmacy. That changed about 2 years ago. There was a recurring appropriation that went in for College of Pharmacy, signaling that the state was ready to fund it and subsidize it. And this makes them whole relative to other units.
Thank you. Second item you'll see on the screen there, the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, there's a $3 million recurring request to invest in precision livestock farming. A few other items, we have $6.5 million for the Tennessee Board of Regents, expanding that workforce pipeline. This project would do a whole host of things, but perhaps the one that we're most excited for here at THEC is to do exactly what I mentioned when we talked about that non-credit data tracking system earlier in our remarks. There's some money embedded in this request that would put that system into place. Long-term, what we would like to be able to do is know who is taking advantage of these non-credit training programs and tie them into our existing data systems so we can really track the success of these various programs. Finally, there's a $35 million non-recurring request for statewide cybersecurity. All of our institutions, both formula units and specialized units, would be eligible for some portion of this funding. And what we know is that a data breach at one of our institutions can cost, on average, as much as $4 million, right? Any amount of money we can put towards cybersecurity, I think, is money well spent. And so this request reflects that. I mentioned those agency requests that we talked about back in August. We do have $12 million for the TSAA award. Last year, this request was $36 million. Our intent ultimately is to get this number up to $36 million in new recurring dollars, but we would like to piecemeal that out over a couple of years, recognizing that's a large chunk of change to take off at once. And then there's an additional almost $25 million in agency requests. Those are included in your materials, and I'm happy to answer questions on them should you have any. With that, the THEC staff recommend approval of all items outlined in Agenda Item 1, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, any questions of Mr. Van Zimmerman about the presentation that he gave there? I do want to comment, Russell, that I'm glad to see the special attention to cybersecurity matters, the $35 million item there. In the Treasury Department, we do risk management for the state, including cybersecurity risk management, and we've seen an increase in instances or breaches, et cetera, across the state at higher education institutions. So it'd be helpful, I think, to take a more serious approach to funding that effort. All right, any other questions or thoughts? Russell, Vernon, excuse me.
Russell, thank you so much for the presentation. Appreciate it. Educate me here a little bit on sort of whether this is a factor or not. We hear a lot about the enrollment cliff that's coming. What impact potentially does this have on the funding formula going forward? If we're seeing good outcomes now and the potential that could drop off substantially, what impact would that have on our colleges and universities?
It would have a pretty substantive impact. Of course, enrollment is not the only consideration in our funding formula, but much of the metrics that you'll see, we have some 20-odd metrics. Many of them are about, in some way, success of students, and you do need to have students on your campus to see those success metrics. Let's say that we had, say, a 10% decline in enrollment. We would expect probably over time that to trickle through your progression and eventually perhaps your awards. It wouldn't have an effect necessarily on your graduation rates, on your workforce training, research and service, degrees per 100 FTE. Those items are somewhat isolated from these impacts, but certainly awards alone account for some 50% of the outcome points in the formula. You might see some substantive impacts there.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or discussion on this particular agenda item? All right, seeing none, the floor is open for a motion to recommend the FY 2025 operating state appropriation recommendations.
I offer motion for approval as recommended.
Okay, the chair will second that. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Hitt, call the roll on the motion to adopt.
Commissioner Matlock?
Here. Yes.
Commissioner Rader?
Aye.
The matter is adopted. Thank you very much. And we want to also recognize Commissioner Matlock is now with us by telephone. We appreciate you being here today. So,
Good to be with you, sir.
all right.
Treasurer,
Yes.
may I just want to take a moment to thank Russell and the fiscal policy team for working very closely with Raj from UT Health Science Center and Christy from ETSU. A lot of what these recommendations come through, like the outcomes funding, there's a rote data process to that. We know what the metrics are. It's the specialized units, the working on the medical units, what is really truly capturing the true need of UT Health Science Center or ETSU. Just seeing our team, UT Health Science Center and ETSU work very closely this year, along with FNA. I just want to call special attention and thank everyone for that this year.
Okay. Any other comments on that agenda item? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is the 2025-26 guiding tuition and fees ranges discussion. That item is on the agenda here at this point, and we have Mr. Van Zimmerman again will give a presentation on that. In addition, we have Dr. Clary Stinson, Vice President for Planning and Finance at Tennessee Tech University, who will also discuss this item when Russell is finished. Thank you. You're recognized.
Thank you. So as a reminder, each year this body is to set binding tuition ranges on tuition and combined tuition and mandatory fees. Typically in November of each year, we will set a guiding range to give an indication to our institutions where the board might intend to go should the appropriations request might be met. This is critically important as our institutions are thinking through their 2025-2026 budgets as soon as today. And for our universities, some 60% of their revenue is going to come from tuition. Our community colleges, maybe 45%. It's a pretty big part of their picture. A brief history of where we've been here. So tuition and fee increases have been relatively low since the board gained binding tuition authority through the Focus Act. You can see in the dotted line there, the first year used to set the binding tuition authority back in 2018, 2019. The real takeaway from this graphic for me is that we're not so far removed from the days where tuition could increase in some years as much as 5, 10, even 15, 20% in some cases. What we've been able to do over the last 7 to 8 years is really bend that curve down and keep our tuition increases relatively modest. What that's meant for our institutions and more importantly for our students is that the real costs of tuition have actually declined in this time. And you can see that on this chart. I know I shared a very similar chart this time last year. When you think about those nominal costs of tuition, that sticker price, of course, that has increased over this time, but adjusting for inflation, looking at that core CPI, we've actually bent that curve back down, and we're at the lowest adjusted for tuition rates that we've been at in about a decade. I think we still have a lot of work to do here. Obviously, we're not as low as we were maybe the decade prior, but I also think the board can be proud of the progress that they've made. One of the larger considerations in our appropriation request and also for the tuition item is CPI. We use core CPI as our inflationary indicator for just about everything we do. Core CPI is now at about 3.3%, or was when we pulled these data to run the formula. That's a good bit lower than where we were last year, 4.4%, a good bit higher than where we were the prior 2 decades. So inflation is calming. That core CPI is maybe calming slightly slower than the overall basket of goods. We do this exercise each year. This happens at a high level. It's maybe a little bit oversimplified, but helps us understand the concept of how the tuition model works here at THEC. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is account for tuition revenue or overall revenue per FTE at our institutions. The example here, you see $1.6 billion in state appropriations from this most recent year and 1.8 for tuition for a total of 3.4. We'll multiply that number by our core CPI, and we're guessing that we need about $113 million in revenue, assuming a flat enrollment between this year and next year. What we then do is divide that between what we might expect from appropriations. $40 million for the outcomes-based funding formula, and an assumed 2.5% or $35 million salary increase at our institutions. That leaves about $38 million in revenue that our institutions would need to account for. Savvy mathematicians, I know Dr. Deaton is behind me, will have figured out that this is actually a 2% tuition increase to get to $38 million. And if all things were equal, that would be true. However, our institutions are in different financial positions, so some institutions might need 1.5%, other institutions might need 5%. And so that 0 to 4% number we'll talk about here in a second represents the broad needs of all of our institutions. I know it's helpful sometimes to look at what our national peers are doing, and the good news here is that Tennessee tuition is growing below the national averages. That's true both at the 2-year level, which you can see here, and also at the 4-year level on this slide. Last May, this board approved a 0 to 5.5% binding tuition range. I'd like to talk briefly about how our institutions responded to that range. We saw institutions respond, honestly, in a variety of ways. 6 institutions keeping below the original proposed range of 0 to 4%, another 15 institutions below 5%. What we know from talking to our institutions is that any tuition increase that they implemented was going to meet their institutional salary needs. That could either be meeting the state cost of living adjustment, or importantly, the consideration from this past year, meeting the new Fair Labor Standards Act's requirements. Looking ahead to this year, you can see that the THEC model suggests a 0 to 4% range, assuming $75 million in appropriations and 3.3 core CPI. I have on the screen here the cost of a 1% tuition increase for our students. I believe you also have a sheet in front of you that outlines this for all numbers of between 1 and 10%. I'll pause here. I would love to, with the chair's blessing, invite Dr. Stinson up to provide an institutional perspective.
Okay. Dr. Stinson, come forward.
Okay, can you all hear me? Is it coming through? Great, all right. Well, thank you all for providing me with this opportunity to talk to you about what it means, tuition increases mean for our campus. And so while all of our campuses have different challenges and different opportunities, what I'm going to present to you today is typical cost increases that we all face. And so I'll start out with what we usually talk to you about, which is our salaries. And of course, we have the 45% match on whatever the state decides that salary increase might be. And that's always, a pretty significant number for us. But I went just a little bit deeper and looked at competitive market salaries that we're dealing with that's outside of just the regular salary increase. So for Tennessee Tech, and I'm sure it's very true, well, I know it's true based on conversations with other CFOs, we're having difficulty hiring faculty into our STEM fields. Sometimes we get very few applicants for positions that we have open. Those are faculty positions. But it goes deeper than that also. We have difficulty hiring professionals, especially in the IT area and in the accounting area. And IT, part of that is because, in a sense, they're really mobile because a lot of them can work from home. And in the accounting, part of that is because we're not graduating as many people in accounting now as maybe in past years, and I know that's an industry problem. We have faced, Tennessee Tech and the other universities, very competitive salaries in the trades area, which is something that we don't always talk about, but we always deal with. I'm talking about HVAC, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, those types of trades, and that has been a very competitive field for us. And then also, with our campus police and campus safety, we're competing with our local law enforcement and having to make adjustments almost on a continuous basis in that area. And then looking at employee retention. So we at Tennessee Tech have done a salary study. And so we have used part of the salary increase coming from the state to address some of our market issues. And we had done our study and phased it into 3 phases. We have addressed 2 of those phases. We still have 1 phase to address, and that's another cost of about $1,200,000. So that's kind of the salary. Now I want to move on to some things that we don't talk about with the commission members very often, and that's technology. Most of our operations, especially the classrooms and research labs, require more and more technology. So we're looking at more modern technology. We're looking at replacing the technology that we already have in place. So we looked at the national benchmark for technologies and for the educational industry. And the expectation is that we're going to spend somewhere around 5.7% of our revenues would go toward IT in order for us to be able to do the things we need to do. And for Tennessee Tech, that's about $12 million. I did those calculations, and we're currently budgeted at $9.5 million, which means that we're short about $2.5 million. So those are the kinds of costs we're looking at, and we're looking at increased we have to replace computers on a regular basis. We use COVID money, all of us use COVID money in order to get laptops and those types of things. And now we're facing, you got to replace those. And so we expect that our spend on devices is going to increase about 9% within the next year or so. Our software, we're expecting an increase of about 14%. And then the IT services, which is, our networks and our personnel, about 9.4% increase in what it's costing us currently. The other thing that we talk about a lot, and I don't know that we share with you all, is our operating budgets for the departments. It's not just the overall operating budgets of the university, but the individual departments. And at Tennessee Tech, it's been over 10 years since we've been able to increase those operating budgets. And with the inflation that's going on, it's difficult for us to, for our departments to manage and keep the same type of service that they have had in the past. We continue to have utility cost increases. Part of that's related to inflation. Part of it is, you know, as we add new facilities and that type of thing, those costs do go up. Another one that I watch very closely is the materials and supplies for regular building maintenance. And those small maintenance projects that we're doing on campus that we're not asking the state to fund. And we've had similar increases in those costs to what we've seen in our outlay and in our major renovation projects. And so that's just a continuing cost for us too. So moving on, talk about student success. Of course, you know, the real important thing is that we be able to provide those new programs that are geared toward the job market of the future, but that we also be able to modernize our existing programs. Recruitment and retention, that's increasing costs. And we do try to help students fill out their financial aid forms, get their class schedule, especially the new students coming in, not used to the campus. How do you navigate it? How do you find those services? So that's some operating costs, but a lot of personnel costs. And also, we have put a program in place to monitor how those first-time students are doing during that first year. And that's for, you know, if they need tutoring, that we can help them get the tutoring that they need. If they're having life issues, we have services that help them to deal with that. And that brings me to two other things that's really important that we're having a lot of conversations about. And that's counseling. We're seeing more students coming to our campus with mental health issues. And, you know, how do we help them deal with those? And also improving campus safety. Another big one for us is regulations. And so I just wrote down quickly some of the things that we've dealt with in this past year, both federal and state regulations. We have Title IX. We're almost running a court system with Title IX, and it is expensive. We got the diversity, equity, inclusion, and the reporting, monitoring on that. We got the personal identifying information, the requirements under all of our federal programs that we are protecting that information. AI is a big one. And, you know, how do we incorporate that into the campus operations, the classroom? And, you know, and how do we make sure that all of that stuff is where it needs to be? Cybersecurity was mentioned earlier, but also Title IV. We had two, one that was really a major change in the regulations in federal financial aid, and that was the reporting on gainful employment. And, you know, we think about these regulations, we don't think about, there's investigations involved, there's monitoring involved, there's reporting involved, and all of these things have associated cost. And then, of course, as we increase research, which is one of our missions, we have additional regulations, especially from the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, NSF, all of those. So I guess I'm saying all this to say, from a campus perspective, it would be great if you all could consider the range of the tuition to give as much flexibility as possible to our boards of trustees. And dealing with the Board of Trustees at Tennessee Tech, they never rubber stamp anything I bring to them. And so they are asking for reporting on what are we doing from an effectiveness and efficiency standpoint. Where have we cut cost? or are there areas we can still cut costs? Those are the questions they ask before they approve a tuition increase. And they're very concerned about that cost to students, and they only approve a higher tuition rate. If we've got something really good, something really strategic, something that really means something to the students, would they even consider a higher tuition rate? But we need that flexibility. We've been having some conversations on THEC's campus about we've got to get past just being able to address our inflationary cost and be able to have those resources that we can invest strategically. And be that new programs or, like I said, the modern technology so that our students come out of that classroom, out of that degree, with the skills that they need for future jobs, not just what we have available presently. And that's pretty much what I have to say, but I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Well, now we have it. It's not the screen, okay. Let me ask again, are there any questions of Dr. Stinson about her presentation? All right, if there aren't any, I'll ask one myself. And as you spoke of flexibility or the need for further flexibility at the institutional level, by flexibility, did you mean flexibility in the range itself going from 0 to 4%, or did you to go over that amount, or did you mean some other aspect of it?
I was talking about the range. You know, from the strategic conversations that we've been having on our campus, I think a 0 to 6%. Now, I don't, we would have to come up with a really good, something, a plan, very tight, very doable, that sort of thing, before our board would approve at that top end. So it could not be just for normal operations that we're doing right now. They would expect us to be able to stay within a lower tuition range for that. But yeah, I was thinking more in terms of a 0 to 6%.
Okay. I'd just ask Mr. Van Zommerman and also Dr. Gentile if they have any comments on Dr. Stinson's point there.
You know, I think the challenge we've had as staff with this authority over the last 8 years is walking that balance between a range that can allow for more production and growth and strategic initiatives, and also an eye towards affordability. In the past, we'd have a range that was a 0 to 2% range. I think it's the smallest we've gotten. Over the last couple of years, that range has increased a bit wider to allow for recognition that, you know, perhaps that smaller range is not going to allow for an institution to invest in strategic initiative. I think going to a range that's as high as 6% would be a departure from what we've done in the past, and recognizing that eye towards affordability. I'm going to look to Mr. Van Zomeren to see if he's got anything to add to that.
Thank you. I really appreciate you coming to speak to us. What we've heard from this body over the last few years is that desire to hear more from campuses on what is ultimately a very complex issue. The slides that I present to you today are a very simplified version of this, and when we hear Dr. Stinson talk, I think it really fleshes out all of the nuances that our campuses have to consider when they set tuition on their individual campuses. What I hope that the state is able to do with the tuition range each year is to set a range that is conservative enough to protect our students from skyrocketing inflation, but lenient enough to allow for the exact conversations that Dr. Stinson noted. Those conversations are robust. They happen between the campus CFOs, CBOs, presidents, and their boards. A range that could be too tight in some years, I think, prevents some of those conversations for talking about what does our campus look like 5-10 years from now from even taking place.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
So, Russell, you said earlier that the 0.4 was to give flexibility because the mathematics really came down to more of a 2% increase. It seems, though, that we're being restrictive, not allowing the universities to set the rate, set an amount themselves and govern themselves accordingly. As Dr. Stinson said, they're going to go through a pretty rigorous conversation and analysis for their campus to determine what the I guess the tolerance is for their community and for their demographic of student as to whether there's affordability beyond 4% or what have you. So it seems like there's an argument to be made for providing a wider range to the colleges and universities and allowing them to determine for themselves what fits best for their profile and their entity. Is that something, obviously you've considered that, but how do we then still get to a proper range? How do we know that four is better than 6, so to speak?
Great question. This is where I'm thankful that I'm not on the board, because these are the questions, the exact sorts of questions we have to answer during our time together today. What the 0 to 4 would allow for is that opportunity for institutions to sort of remain revenue neutral relative to where they were last year. That range would include most of our institutions. We know that some institutions might be in particular financial situations where, frankly, they could use more than 4%. And the challenge for this board and for our state is that we have one range to rule them all, right? We're not able to set individual ranges by campus, nor necessarily do we want to be. And so we have to find a policy that strikes the middle ground, to your point, between safeguarding the student financial picture, also understanding that the state spends $600 million in scholarships each year. We expect that money to go a certain distance, especially when we think about Promise or Reconnect, where we're picking up the full tab there. So I do think there's an interest from the state to have some voice in this conversation, but maybe that voice, to some of our campuses' points, could be a little bit more nuanced and allow them to have a louder voice in the conversation as well.
Okay. Certainly, from my standpoint, just to follow up on points that have been made here, I appreciate very much Dr. Stinson and the staff at Tennessee Tech and other institutions in the system that obviously all take as appropriate and business-oriented method of looking at their budgets and the expenditures and the revenues on which they do their budgeting on an annual basis. And as Dr. Stinson alluded to, it's a hard decision for the Board of Trustees or whoever at the university is involved in that process. So we recognize that and appreciate their efforts in that regard. I would just suggest Vernon Stafford, or Commissioner Stafford, is right that, there may need to be some look at, whether more flexibility should be allowed. But I think if we were to do that, I would not support doing that today here. It's more a matter of looking at developing a process to look at that aspect of our procedure in this regard over the next year, looking to next year's cycle, because we need a process which we're following to arrive at alterations to our model. We have a model now, and we generally follow that. So with those things noted, and with thanks to Dr. Stinson for her good comments and bringing these things to our attention, is there anything further that anyone has on this at this time?
Chairman, I'll just say that I agree completely with you. It would be radical and random for me to suggest or recommend a different range, recognizing that the staff has really gone through a very copious process that I think is more well supported than me coming up and offering a recommendation that differs. So I agree, excuse me, that I wouldn't suggest offering a different range, but I do challenge the staff to really go back and determine how we can provide a range that is more appropriate for the vast differences between our colleges and universities.
Okay, so I think the staff should note Commissioner Stafford's request there, which the committee asked that his request to be honored over the next year here, and that we develop some look at that process. So,
Mr. Chair?
yes, Dr.
Commissioner
Gentile.
Rader would like to speak.
Okay, Commissioner Rader, you're recognized.
Hi, I was just going to
quickly chime in though on the range, having a degree from the University of Tennessee and the University of Tennessee College of Law. Almost 2 decades ago, I feel like I lived through multiple what I felt like were 10% increases. And I would just encourage universities as they use the range that we provide them to be at zero or close to zero as possible, and look out for the students' best interests, especially during this incredibly inflationary time. I just know how important that is to students and their families. And if that causes, hard decisions to be made within the university and the expenses and the overhead that universities have, I certainly understand that, but just trying to look out for the best interests of the students while providing them with, of course, the education that they deserve.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, any other discussion points on this particular agenda item? All right, seeing none, we're on, as we said, agenda item 3 here, which is the FY 2025-26 guiding tuition and fees ranges. Chair would entertain a motion with respect to that item. So moved. I have a motion for approval by Commissioner Stafford. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I believe it was Commissioner Rader seconded it. Any further discussion on that? If not, Ms. Hitt, would you call the roll on the motion to adopt?
Commissioner Matlock,
Yes.
Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.
Aye. Okay, the item passes unanimously. And the next item on our agenda is item number 4, the FY 25-26 capital projects recommendations. And we have Mr. Paul Marshall, Senior Director of Facilities Planning and Preparedness, who will address that item. Paul.
Good afternoon, everyone. Treasurer Lillard, members of the committee. We will be presenting the FY 25-26 capital budget for your approval. The total capital outlay recommendation this year is for $1.3 billion in state appropriations. This year, THEC's request consists of 20 outlay projects, which are made up by 14 new construction, 3 renovations, 1 campus infrastructure, and 2 inflation projects. THEC, of course, continues to encourage campuses to include renovations, major renovations, and demolitions as part of these outlay projects in order to reduce deferred maintenance and to improve space efficiencies. The capital process follows a fairly new format here for 25-26. It's streamlined to provide some increased transparency and predictability. Once the instructions were issued to the campuses, THEC conducted training with all the SPAs to make sure that they understand the new process. This was also conducted to make sure that they understand the requirements for submission and also what has historically been scored as a successful submission. The list of capital projects in the past has reset every year. This year, there's a new procedure in that we're going to take the top 5 unfunded projects from the previous fiscal year and move those to the top of this year's recommendation. This new process gives increased predictability, which was recommended strongly by the institutions, and that's sort of how we're achieving that goal. The questions that are part of the submission are organized to ensure that the projects submitted will align with the most current state goals and the institutional needs of the campuses. The balance of the outlay projects, excluding the inflation projects, were reviewed and were scored this year by academic and facility needs groups, and they're all ranked by their median scores. And of course, the submissions, as they're received, are ranked on the merit of what is submitted to THEC. The review categories this year are state goals, academic programs, enrollment data, and space needs. And this year, in addition to the normal categories for scoring, campuses were also given up to the opportunity for 10% of the overall score to be used as presidential weighting points. So this can account for as much as 10% of the overall score if the campus chooses to use that. And that was in response to the campus request to how they can have an individual project be shown to have the priority. If there were multiple projects submitted from an institution, that's how they could assign priority to their individual projects from each institution. Likewise, this year, as all years in the past, the match component is pass-fail. The first project this year, the top project, is the UT Knoxville Chemistry Building. As you can see, it's a carryover from last year. This project will construct a new state-of-the-art facility for chemistry. The project is a new 163,000 square foot facility for chemistry instruction and research that is currently conducted in a 50-year-old building on campus. The new building will replace these obsolete facilities and labs and support students and disciplines across the natural health and sciences and engineering. The number 2 project is the Middle Tennessee State University Civic Leadership and Applied Humanities Building. This is going to be a 130,000 square foot civic leadership building that will serve as the new home for select liberal arts and departments, history, political science, international relations, sociology and anthropology, and global studies. The number 3 project is the East Tennessee State University Brown Hall renovation Phase 2. Brown Hall renovation is a 2-phase project with the design of the entire building and the construction of the north side funded as part of the 22-23 capital outlay budget. And this is the request in 25-26 to complete the renovation of the building with the work concentrated on the south side of Brown Hall. The proposed project will complete the renovation of the sciences building, providing modern classrooms, teaching labs, and undergraduate research spaces for the university. The number 4 project is the Tennessee Board of Regents Vol State TCAT Hartsville Wilson County Higher Education Center. Due to the expansive growth in Wilson County, Vol State Community Colleges proposes to form a partnership with TCAT Hartsville. This project will offer programs for in-demand occupations and industries in Wilson County, such as supply chain management, business and finance, healthcare, education, and computer technology. The number 5 project is the Tennessee Tech University Social Sciences Building. This will construct a new building that will provide modern classrooms, faculty offices, and support spaces for the College of Education and Arts and Sciences. The project will provide an additional flexible academic space to address campus-wide space shortages for classrooms and faculty offices. Number 6 is the East Tennessee State University main campus utility infrastructure. This year, it's important to understand that in addition to some of the other more conventional outlay projects that we've had in the past, we encouraged campuses and gave them the opportunity to submit infrastructure-only projects. ETSU did provide that. This project will provide a comprehensive replacement of aging steam lines and other utilities across campus, many of which are almost as much as a century old. Number 7 is the Tennessee Board of Regents TCAT Shelbyville-Lincoln County campus replacement. Number 8 is the University of Tennessee at Martin College of Business and Global Affairs. Number 9 is the UT Institute of Agriculture College of Veterinary Medicine renovation and addition. Number 10 is the University of Tennessee Knoxville Interdisciplinary Classroom Building. Number 11 is the Tennessee Board of Regents TCAT Nashville Robertson County Sumner County campus replacements. And number 12 is the Tennessee State University New Engineering Building Phase 2. Number 13 is the Tennessee Board of Regents TCAT Hartsville Wilson County Higher Education Center Phase 2, which is a follow-up to the top 5 project that was Phase 1. Number 14 is the Tennessee Board of Regents TCAT Statewide Aviation Campus Replacements. Number 15 is the University of Memphis Research Modernization Project across multiple buildings on campus. Number 16 is the University of Memphis Interdisciplinary Science Research Building. Number 17 is the Austin P. Military Academic Building. And number 18 is the University of Tennessee Martin Beef Cattle Teaching and Demonstration Facility. There are 2 projects coming forward for inflation, and these are the Tennessee Tech University Advanced Construction and Manufacturing Building and the University of Tennessee Business and Economics renovation. So again, the total state request for funds is $1.3 billion, as broken down by the 3 categories there. The total request for capital maintenance is $335 million. It is recommended, this $335 million is recommended based on age, a cost per square foot based on the building type, and the overall square footage of the campus. And the disclosed projects are projects that are funded by all other sources that are state, such as other than state funding, such as plant funds, auxiliary funds, gift in place, grants, TSSBA bonds, and other sources. There's a request for $339 million for the disclosure of 11 revenue-funded projects, including 5 projects that request to use TSSBA funds in the amount of $191 million. That's the 25-26 capital budget presented for your consideration and approval. I'm glad to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Marshall about his presentation here?
Paul, thank you so much. Absolutely. As always, you and the team do a great job keeping track of all of these and processing these through. I did have a question with regard to the submission by the University of Memphis with regard to its research programs and buildings. Correct me if I'm misunderstanding. The rubric, which is a terrific device and it works, I think, very well, doesn't accommodate sort of the uniqueness of a research facility or research program. The University of Memphis is now the second R1 university in the state, public university, I should say, in the state. And so their responses to the rubric, I think, might be a bit more unique and may not have covered everything correctly. Is there something that can be done for unique universities or situations like this that would give an equal opportunity for consideration of funding in the future?
I think, Steve, would you like to say anything on that?
If you can, Paul, speak to the space needs of this, because I know you've got some good thoughts there, and I'll circle back to the research.
Sure. So on the facilities, this year was unique in that because of the new rubric, we actually broke the review process out where there was a team, a blind team, unbiased blind team of reviewers for the academics side and then for the space needs side. So in the past, the review team has typically been a consistent review team over all of the submission, and this year, because of the difference we've made in the process, we sort of broke those two out. So to Stephen's point, the facilities team actually reviewed this project very highly because the manner in which we were using for our metrics to see how they were using and how they were prioritizing renovation of existing buildings made it score extremely highly. So that maybe is a little confusing insofar as the overall score, but the facility side scored very well.
So on to to what extent does a project meet the state's goals or local economic development? When we first developed that end of this process about 8 years ago, we are cognizant that a project that's not related to degree attainment might not do as well in a process like this. And so we did expand the rubric to say, talk about local economic development, talk about statewide economic development. But I think perhaps what we, in thinking about in the future on how to improve this process further, is actually taking a step back and looking at our state higher education strategic master plan that we're kicking off early next year. In the past, in the most recent past, THEC and development of that master plan has not focused on research and development from a statewide perspective. That's changing in our own conversations and how I like to think about higher education. As we know, that's also changing with ECD, the commissioner of ECD, McWhorter, UT, the universities all together talking about research and development. I think when we refine our state strategic goals to incorporate research and development, that could then better influence how a project like that would score in this process.
Great.
I just want to second what Commissioner Stafford said. I think I'm gratified to him for bringing that point up about the comparison of research projects versus traditional brick and mortar capital projects and the need to look at that rubric differently. So I appreciate Mr. Marshall's efforts and those of Dr. Gentile in that regard too. Are there any other comments or questions of Mr. Marshall or anyone about this matter? Okay, if there are none, then the chair would entertain a motion in regard to the FY 2025-26 capital projects recommendation.
I move approval as
Motion.
recommended.
A motion and a second then on that point. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Hitt, call the roll on the motion to adopt.
Commissioner Matlock?
Yes.
Commissioner Rader?
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford?
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard?
Aye. Okay, it's unanimous, and that's been approved. Thank you, Mr. Marshall, for your good work and that of the staff of the commission. All right, the next item on our agenda is the East Tennessee State University Master Plan item. Jeremy Ross, Chief Operating Officer and Vice President for Administration at ETSU, We'll introduce Lauren Leidy, Senior Principal Campus Planning Studio Leader at Smith Group, to discuss that item. You're recognized. I don't think your mic is on there. Just punch that little button there.
Thank you.
I had a little trouble with that myself earlier, okay?
It's all, there's tape and black buttons.
Right, it's hard to figure that out, okay.
Thank you. On behalf of Dr. Brian Nolan, appreciate you letting us be here today. We've spent a little over a year in a very inclusive process on campus and with architects, landscape architects, academicians, data consultants, and others. Very talented team, very inclusive approach. And I would like to introduce to you today Lauren Leidy, who's a principal with the Smith Group for our master plan. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you to share the East Tennessee State University Campus Master Plan. We are pleased to be partnered with Clark Nixon on this effort, and I'd like to share with you the highlights of this very comprehensive campus planning effort. So as Jeremy said, this was an extensive process. This was over 2 years in length, starting in fall 2022, and completing this past fall with unanimous support from the Board of Trustees in September. It was an iterative process, starting with a period of discovery, going through an exploration, looking at both detailed data that was provided to us by ETSU, going through additional analysis such as facility condition assessment and other items that you see here on the screen. And then following with the process of refinement, really developing the preliminary and final plan that I'll be sharing with you today, and pulling all of that together as part of a report and documentation. And so throughout every step of this process, we really worked to ensure that it was an inclusive effort, had charrette sessions with leadership, town halls, pop-up sessions to gather student input, and we even had a mobile application that allowed for interactive engagement with over 1,400 unique responses to that survey. And so throughout this process, it really allowed us to gather a lot of input, both qualitative, that we could pair with the quantitative data to help inform the recommendations as part of this plan. So some of the key takeaways that really helped guide our effort that you see here on the screen, I won't go through all of these specifically, but I do want to highlight the fact that ETSU has continued to see growth, and there has been a demand for additional on-campus experience and living. And so with that, there was a lot of requests and pressure for additional enhancements to the on-campus experience, undergraduate experience in particular. We identified a need for additional housing, both modernization of existing housing and also a need for additional future housing. And then really a focus on some very specific space needs, particularly relating to the growth in the College of Engineering and also the health professions. But really a focus on opportunities to continue to focus on renovation and modernization of existing spaces. So throughout this effort, we worked closely to ensure that it was aligned with ETSU's strategic plan. You'll see the strategic principles on the right side of the screen, and then on the left side of the screen, the campus planning guiding principles that really informed this effort, with the focus on enhancing and reimagining campus spaces to support particularly the undergraduate student experience, and a focus as well on optimizing resources and better utilizing existing facilities. And so as part of this effort, we look carefully at enrollment, understanding that ETSU is planning for continued enrollment growth. We completed a detailed space assessment, looking at space utilization and leveraging the 2020 academic space study, taking what was, at that time, it was completed with fall 2018 data, so we refreshed that with fall 2021 information to really understand utilization, occupancy, and kind of qualitative factors to help us understand space needs. As you can see on this slide on the screen, there were areas that we identified that could be optimized for greater utilization, and so that's really helping us take better advantage of existing spaces across campus. We also look carefully at facility condition, completing an additional facility condition assessment. And what you see with those buildings that are colored orange, yellow, and red is there is significant deferred maintenance across campus. And so with the renovations that have been recommended as part of the campus master plan, will help to address that and really focus on creating more modern facilities across the campus. One of the aspects that we completed a detailed study on was housing. Working with Wachowski Advisory, we completed a detailed assessment to really understand existing housing today, and then looking ahead to understand what housing would be needed to support the demand. And what we found was that there is a need for 275 to 300 new beds over the 10-year period to support the demand for on-campus residential housing. We also looked carefully at parking, working with Walker Consultants to do a detailed study of parking. There was a real perception that there was a lack of parking, but when we completed a more detailed study, what we understood was that there are ways to better optimize parking. There are available spaces to accommodate the near-term demands on campus. And so it was really trying to provide a more intuitive approach to parking, and really then over the long term, sort of around the 10-year mark, if the campus continues to grow as planned, there would be need for future parking, which we've identified as part of this campus master plan. So I want to share with you the campus master plan, the recommendations that came forth. What you see here is a map of the campus today. When we talk about main campus, we talk about what you see in the foreground, sort of particularly the kind of the undergraduate experience, and then going across state of Franklin, which is sort of in the center of the screen, is the Mountain Home VA campus, which includes the medical school. And so when we began our effort, we took into consideration current projects. These are projects that are planned or under construction. And so you see those on the screen that were taken into consideration as part of this effort. And then looking at short-term projects. So for short-term, we're considering this 0 to 10-year future. You can see by the key in the corner of the screen, blue being academic, yellow being housing, a real focus on academics and housing, with a focus on renovations, opportunities to support continued growth in engineering and the health professions, and also then green being opportunities for campus enhancements around open space and circulation. So if we take a closer look at the short-term projects, I just want to highlight a couple on the screen. One being Wilson Wallace. This is where we've identified an opportunity for both renovation and expansion to better accommodate the growing College of Engineering. You'll also see Sherrod Library. When we looked carefully at the space assessment, we understood that we do have excess library space right now, so within this building, there's an opportunity to complete a renovation that could better accommodate other uses, such as academic support services or additional departmental space. And then we've also identified opportunities for future housing. And so this could be a possible living learning facility, and just providing ETSU with a variety of different options that could accommodate that future housing need that we identified. As part of this, we also looked at opportunities to really transform the experience on campus and prioritize pedestrians. So this is the first of two slides I want to share with you that speaks to that transformation opportunity. The first being Gilbert Drive. This is a key entry point to campus, which on the top of the slide you'll see right now is lined on both sides of the drive by parking, really a very lackluster arrival experience and difficult to navigate for pedestrians. So the proposed transformation really focuses on a more multimodal experience, definitely enhanced experience for pedestrians and more intuitive for vehicles as well. And then sort of carrying on that language with the proposal for John Robert Bell Drive, which is in the center of campus, once again, lined on both sides by parking, and I think a real opportunity to enhance the overall experience. And then as we look into the 10-plus year future, long-term projects, these are really more aspirational projects that provides a visionary approach in alignment with the broader goals found within the strategic plan and the campus planning guiding principles. And as part of this, I want to draw your attention to two areas of potential opportunity. The first being on the left side of the screen, the health science corridor, and the second being on the right side of the screen, which is around kind of the upper corner that we're calling the East Gateway or West Walnut area. And so as a longer-term opportunity, just thinking about the continued interest and growth in health professions and health sciences. And so we've identified an area along State of Franklin Road that could really, I think, enhance the overall kind of edge condition and presence of ETSU, but it also provides a great opportunity for additional space for continued development and enhancement of both classroom, laboratory, and clinical space for the health sciences, and potentially even opportunity for external partnership as well. And then if we look to the east side of campus, thinking about future potential for this area, which is currently kind of underutilized, this could be a critical kind of hinge point with Johnson City. So sort of this is the edge of campus, an opportunity to really create a better town-gown interface, incorporate housing for graduate students or even faculty and staff, and other sort of mixed-use opportunities with parking incorporated to that as well. And so that really encompasses the overall campus master plan at a very high level with the recommendations and the analysis this was completed. And as part of that, to support this effort, we also developed an understanding, a high level of initial costs recommendations for a 5-year capital improvement plan. And one final piece I want to mention is just to focus on security. This was another piece that we looked at in depth and providing a series of recommendations for the campus that allowed us to provide recommendations around centralizing public safety operations, enhanced security cameras and building access, key card access, and improved pedestrian circulation and lighting across campus as well. And so with that, I'd like to open up to any questions or discussion. Thank you.
Okay, any questions about that good presentation on the ETSU master plan? I'd like to ask just one question myself, and that is, Dr. Gentile or other appropriate staff people, are we, in regard to security that the lady quite rightly raised here, do we have a working group going on among our institutions across the state in regard to security where they get together virtually periodically to discuss best trends, issues that they all see, et cetera, you know, and our responses to that? Can you, does anybody speak to that?
Certainly can. I'm going to ask Paul Marshall to come back up here, please. He's our resident security guru.
Good afternoon again. They'll be very brief. So this occurs in a number of ways. One way is we meet monthly with many of our partners virtually, and we go through projects. And anything that has come forward as an emerging trend on security, I always share that with them. Likewise, I have been asked to and have now implemented and facilitated a Microsoft Teams virtual group where we meet with all of the campus chiefs of police, and they're on a Teams talk group, so they constantly are sharing information. So that's two of the ways that we do that. Likewise, we have a facilities seminar coming up a week from tomorrow, or a week from Friday rather, at the Tennessee Tower, and we will be presenting some security overviews there as well. So all of that in addition to the facility best practices guides that we are continuing to evolve and have rolled out to all the campuses. So those are sort of multiple ways that we get those information out there.
Does that also cover the possibility of unrest on campus as opposed to just simply a security issue?
It absolutely does. In fact, just last week, we were asked by the Tennessee Board of Regents to, in partnership with TEMA, to go to their headquarters, and we actually presented a 4-hour FEMA curriculum course to all the TBR campus presidents on multiple events on campus, not just active shooter or anything, but multiple events, including civil unrest. And we've actually, since last week, been asked to do some tabletop exercises at multiple campuses to address civil unrest and other type of on-campus events.
Well, I thank you for that good response and for Dr. Gentile's response. Mr. Stafford, do you have something on that?
I do have one question for Dr. Layden. When I look at master plans as we go forward, one of the things that I think about is flexibility for multi-purpose use of buildings and so on. How do you all think about that to make sure that campuses are maximizing the potential different uses for the facilities, but also the potential of swings in enrollment or on-site population and so on?
Well, we appreciate the question. We take a close look at what the specific space needs, if there's specialized spaces to support specific programs, but beyond that, then also looking at kind of different uses that could potentially be accommodated in the same building. So trying to provide a variety of different possibilities as part of the campus master plan, so that, if, we see sort of a decline in one particular program, there could be flexibility in the way that space is developed so that it could accommodate, other types of uses. So, at the master plan level, it is more general, but really trying to provide a variety of different options throughout all of the different recommendations that are included.
Okay. Any further questions of Ms. Leidy in regard to her presentation? Thank you for your, excuse me, going ahead. Commissioner Brackett.
Sorry, just a quick discussion point. As a student who's pre-med at ETSU, I've spent a lot of time in Brown Hall myself, and I think that it's equipment could do, like, with a good modernization and a good renovation, just as was proposed in the master plan, and also seeing firsthand the housing being at full capacity. I think these are reasonable steps forward for student success at ETSU. So I just wanted to add that comment.
Okay, point well taken. All right, any other discussion on this item? All right, thank you very much for your good presentation, okay?
Thank you.
All right, we now have before us, do we have a motion and a second on this? I'm going to need a motion, I think, to approve this item, the East Tennessee State University Master Plan.
I'll move approval.
All right, Commissioner Stafford moves it, and there's a second. Any discussion further on this matter? Seeing none, Ms. Hitt, will you call the roll on the motion to adopt?
Commissioner Matlock?
Yes.
Commissioner Rader?
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford?
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard?
Aye. All right, the item is unanimously adopted. Thank you for that. And I just want to comment in closing Mr. Marshall's comments about security and the coordination that goes on in that. That's one of the many great roles that I think THEC and its staff plays statewide to coordinate those efforts among our institutions so that we're all aware at all institutions what the latest practices are, what issues are that have been seen, and responses that need to be prepared for various scenarios, because in the world we live in these days, that's something that unfortunately is with us all the time, potentially. So thank you, and thank you to the staff for what you do in that regard, and the staff of our institutions throughout the state. All right, next item is the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture Master Plan. Dr. Keith Carver, Senior Vice President and Senior Vice Chancellor of the UT Institute of Agriculture, will introduce Jessica Leonard, who's a principal at Ayers St. Rose, and Ms. Leonard will then present the master plan and answer any questions that people have. And I should say he's the great Dr. Keith Carver. I shouldn't just, leave him without accolades here, because Dr. Carver is a longtime contributor to higher education in Tennessee, and I'm proud to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here, and always happy to be in front of the commission. So we're excited to present this, and the letter that the work that our team has done and working with our consulting group really represents the first master plan ever for the Institute of Agriculture. And Mr. Chairman, as you know, it's across all 95 counties and about 2,100 acres under management. And so being able to do this and look at how we go about making sure we're doing great ag research and education and extension work is critically important. So we're excited about this 12-month engagement we've been involved with, and look forward to presenting and hearing your questions. Thank you.
Well, I might add, for when she's coming up, that as a regular attendee of the UT Milan No-Till Day seminar, it's a great thing that y'all do, that particular program, in addition to many others. Yes, ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carver. So we're really excited to be here. Jessica Leonard with Ayers St. Rose. My colleague Matt is in the audience. He was the project manager and designer. You'll see this is a little different than the great project that Lauren just presented in scale and scope. And so we're excited to walk through, as Keith said, the first master plan for UTIA. So first, just setting the stage, UTIA is comprised of 4 primary units. The agriculture research, which we'll refer to as AgRec, UT Extension, the Herbert College of Agriculture, and the College of Veterinary Medicine. So those 4 units make up UTIA. And this master plan is meant to be a part of and a shared vision for the UT Knoxville plan, which we brought to you about 1.5 years ago. And so UT Knoxville focused specifically as it relates to UTIA on the buildings and the programs that are adjacent to the Knoxville campus under the College of Ag, College of Vet Med. This expands statewide, and so this looks across the whole state of Tennessee, 28 entities, and so looking at the 4-H centers, the extension offices, 18 AgRec, and then 3 other locations that I'll walk through today. Just reiterating the scope, so each one of these had different aspects that we covered as part of the master plan, with really the College of Ag being folded in and really documented, and some of the Vet Med under the Knoxville plan. But now, hopefully with approval, this will be thought of as one UT Knoxville UTIA plan. So this is not a project where we would be here probably for the next day if we went through each one of these sites individually. So we're gonna present it across the state and hope you understand the scale and magnitude, breaking down each one of these 4 groups. So the first being AgRec, there's 18 centers across the state in the 3 different regions, East, Central, and West. And that makes up 90% of the land holdings, over 19,000 acres. And each one of these has unique research that is accompanied, that is based primarily around crops, animals, and forestry. And each of these locations has specific research based on the unique soils, climate, topography that's in this area. So it is not by chance that the university and UTIA has chosen to have locations in these areas across the state. Similarly, there's 3 extension offices. There is a regional extension or a county extension in all of those 95 counties, but these are the 3 headquarters that serve the administrative and engagement activities in each of these regions. There is a building at each one, so we've looked at the quality condition and the needs around these headquarter buildings and the programs that they then facilitate across each of the county offices. The 4 4-H centers, this master plan, we primarily focused on 3 and then folded in the recently completed Lone Oaks plan. But looking at the 4 4-H centers across the state, each of them have unique programming. They're indoor and outdoor activities. What is unique, there's also housing that's for campers as well as staff. There's activities that happen year-round, a lot for K through 12, but then also having activities for adults and different events for weddings and other engagements that happen on these sites. And then finally, UT Gaddop and VetRec, closest to the Knoxville campus in East Tennessee. The VetRec is right across the Tennessee River near the College of Vet Med. That really has a lot of the hands-on living laboratory aspects of the college, allowing them to have animals and access to different types of research and clinical exposure right across the river. And then UT Gaddop is comprised of multiple properties, 2 of which the university owns now, 1 of which it will own in the future, and that will become part of a very unique arboretum-like aspect of the UT Gardens, a very beautiful place if you have not been there to be able to visit. So when we look comprehensively, looking at all 21,000 of these acres, we have done a plan, individual plans for each one of these sites, and today we're going to look high level at what were the drivers across the entire institution. The plan was just over 12 months. It's kind of incredible that we did it at that pace. It started with existing conditions, understanding of the different sites, visiting each one across 3 different regional trips, determining the needs, and then developing concepts and program drivers, thinking both institution-wide and then unique recommendations for each site. And because it was so large, we leveraged both individual meetings but packet reviews so that each site could, at each phase, really make sure we were capturing their needs and telling their story appropriately. So at the master plan, the overarching principles are in alignment with the strategic plan for UTIA. And these are overarching principles across all of the sites and units. And those really focus on first mission as a land-grant university, being able to fulfill the mission around discovery, research, and education. Maximizing and using the resources wisely. So we're really focusing first on renewal or renovation of existing facilities where possible, and then looking to build new if that cannot be met. Thinking about accessibility, these sites are very accessible and need to be welcoming to the public. So how do you create an environment that allows for that? Mitigating risk, not only of security of animals and people, we talked about security in the last plan, but also knowing that you have children and adults and multiple different populations on these sites, so being able to accommodate security there. And then preserving the unique resources and assets of your land, and then thinking about opportunities for revenue generation. Then each site had individual planning drivers that were unique to the recommendations, so thinking about where you need unique facilities, housing, security, risk management, or engagement and event facilities were unique to each one of these locations. Space needs, you can imagine, this doesn't fit neatly into THEC buckets all the time, but we looked at the overall drivers, and similar to the Knoxville plan, they really are around certain areas of growth as well as renewal of condition. And so growth areas is around research, both in number of grants, number of researchers, the STEM programs, and the way to conduct more outreach to your overall statewide population. And then facility renewal, recognizing that some of these facilities are aging, they're not meeting the needs for people or for animals. And one thing we looked at in a little bit deeper, because there's not an FCI conditions index for each building, was the housing, and recognizing that about half of it is really ripe for renovation and repair, and that should be a priority as some of the outcomes of this plan. The space needs fit into where we could, the regular standard THEC buckets, and then putting other into the non-residential, and then we did document residential needs as it was unique to each of these sites. What I do want to call attention to is when you look at the scale of these needs, first of all, a lot of these sites, the land and the exterior space is equally as important and valuable as the interior, so the number of projects here, these are just representing interior spaces. But the delta of need is, under 200,000. That's a building on any one of your campuses. And so these really are smaller individual projects, whether they're barns or buildings or event venues. And so we don't want the order of magnitude to mask the overall need of what these projects represent. So the projects were grouped across different categories, thinking about education, research, agriculture, venues, housing, and infrastructure. And then we've mapped them across the state. And so each site really has a mix of projects. And what the goal of the plan was to think, rather than having each one be very small individual, is how can we start to group them and bundle them to make a more substantial project? And so with each one of our phases, there's projects that are already funded. Majority of those are part of the American Recovery Act that are underway right now. And then the near-term projects are broken into state capital outlay and then more capital maintenance funds. And these start to represent, in some cases, the highest priorities. In other cases, these are enabling projects that are required in order to have projects happen in the midterm. And so some are individual buildings and some are groups and bundles of projects to create a project at scale that can be implemented. Similarly, in the midterm, a number of projects that are, again, representing each location across the state in a variety of types of projects. And finally, as we think about the boundaries, each of these land holdings is quite large, and so we wanted to recognize the geographic boundary of each site and recognizing that there's not an immediate need or desire to expand, but we wanted to recognize that land is an asset and that in some cases there might be a need or an opportunity where there's a unique type of soil or a location to do specific research to the Institute. And that's what would be within these two boundary areas to be able to expand if needed in the future. So that's a high level of a 500-plus page document that I'm sure you've all read by now. Any questions?
Thank you very much for the good presentation. Any questions of Ms. Leonard? All right, seeing no questions, is there a motion with respect to the item?
So made.
So moved.
All right, so we have a motion to approve the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture Master Plan, and it's been moved and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Hitt, would you call the roll on the motion to approve?
Commissioner Matlock,
Yes.
Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.
Aye. All right, thank you, Dr. Carver and Ms. Leonard, for your presentations there. The item is adopted. All
Mr.
right.
Chairman?
Yes, Dr.
I just want to jump in here real quick to say that about 10 years ago, we saw the last master plan, and it was a really good master plan. But we were asking questions, like, what are the true needs across the state? And back then, a plan like this was seen as very difficult and challenging to get to. And I know this has been a very difficult and challenging plan, but the fact that you have encompassed all of the footprint of this state in those areas, I just want to thank you very much to both of you in doing this. And also the Lone Oaks Farm, that was a farm that was acquired 8 years ago, I believe so. It is a fantastic piece of land, and if you've not been able to get out there, I highly recommend it. Perhaps we'll do a field trip sometime, but again, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gentile. Next item is item 7, our final business item for today, the post-secondary state authorization rule revision. Dr. Stephanie Bellard Chase, Senior Director of Post-Secondary State Authorization, will address that item. Dr. Bellard Chase, welcome.
Thank you, Treasurer Lillard, Dr. Gentile, members of the committee, good afternoon. As you recall, back in August, we came before the committee as an informational item, just letting you know that we felt there was a need for a rule revision. After that meeting, we filed the proper documentation with the Secretary of State, and we had a rulemaking hearing on October 22nd. I think that is important to note that, during a rulemaking, people can oppose your rule or they can support it. One institution showed up at the rulemaking hearing and they supported the rule. We did have some unofficial conversations with about 10 other institutions when they first got the notice that had some concern. But after we explained to them what was going on and why we needed it, they were fine and they did not oppose it. So I think it's really important to accentuate that out of the 266 institutions, none of them opposed the rules. Okay. Just some history. The Tennessee General Assembly amended the Tennessee Higher Education Authorization Statutes in 2016. Through the passage of the Tennessee Higher Education Authorization Act of 2016, called the THEAA. As a result of the passage of the THEAA in 2016, the regulatory function was evaluated, staffing reduced from 20 to 5 FTE over time, processes revised to improve efficiencies, and fees in total were significantly decreased. Largely due to the fee changes starting in 2016, the total revenue received to fund the THEAA regulatory function was greatly condensed. Despite the staff reductions, revenues remained insufficient to cover the costs, including things like COLA, rent, administrative costs, costs for STS and our data management system, which is online for online applications, requiring that monies from the THEAA reserve account continue to be used to offset the deficit. So as you see, July 1, 2016, our reserve was 2.56 million. As of July 1, 2024, it's 575,000. Recognizing that this approach is not feasible going forward, we are asking that the fees as set forth in the rule be revised to ensure that that THEC is meeting its statutory obligations. Here are the statutory obligations. Tennessee Code annotated 449-7-2014A authorizes the commission to set fees annually based on the intent to collect revenues sufficient to fully fund all costs of the THEAA. I want to make another note that I think is important. No state appropriations are applied to the functions that we do. So all of the money that funds this regulatory function comes from the institutions that choose to be post-secondary educational institutions in Tennessee. Pursuant to the THEAA, THEC is directly responsible for the oversight and operation of degree and non-degree granting accredited and unaccredited institutions that offer a wide variety of academic, career, technical, and trade. So the institutions that are authorized by THEC offer everything from truck driving programs up to PhDs and anything you can think in between. So just again, authorization is approval by the commission to engage in activities that are prohibited without authorization. Authorization is required to legally operate a post-secondary educational institution in Tennessee unless an exemption applies. And exemptions, of course, apply to all the publics and all the THEC institutions. Authorization is the minimum standards. Also, authorization or exemption is required for accreditation and Title IV eligibility. And I think this goes into some of the importance of what we do. There was an institution that was accredited already, and they wanted to offer Title IV. So the federal student aid reached out to us to say, hey, is this institution authorized? And we're like, no, they're not. So they came to the training, and now they'll be authorized because they want to get Title IV funds. So it's some of the things that we do to help these businesses who choose to be post-secondary educational institutions get to where they want to be. Okay, this is just a few things. I'm not going to go over it, but I think that it's important to know the enabling statute is to provide for the protection and education of Tennessee citizens, institutions, and students. The things that are highlighted in blue are our main priorities, the functions that we do. We do conduct quarterly trainings. There's an initial authorization training that regularly authorized institutions have to attend before they can submit an application. And then there's a post-initial authorization training. And that teaches them about the rules and their responsibilities, et cetera. Another big thing is complaints. We do complaints that are not handled at the institutional level, whether it be a regularly authorized or optional expedited authorization institution, the students can come to us for relief on those. We do collect statistical data, and on our website are reports for each authorized institution showing the completion, withdrawal, and placement rate. If an institution wants to change their name or their location, we do it. We help them with that function. When an institution closes, we find out generally from students calling or other schools. And one thing that THEC does is great is we serve as the repository. So, you know, like I went to FISC. If I need my transcript, I call FISC, I pay a fee, they send it to me. But when these institutions close, that's not available to them. And that's the role that THEC does for them. So we have hundreds of thousands of transcripts when institutions close. And on a daily basis, students call in to get their transcripts so they can further their education and do other things. We also have something called a tuition guarantee fund here. It was established by the General Assembly to reimburse students or entities making loans enrolled in authorized institutions. Treasurer Lillard is the chairman of this TGF board. And basically, the THEC, we serve as the staff. So for 6 years, every authorized institution has to pay into this fee. And this fee is exclusively used for when an institution closes and students did not get what they paid for. they either get paid back or we pay for a teach-out overall. And that is a separate fund than the reserve I was speaking about, and it is maintained by the treasurer's office. And just again, this is just an overview of how many institutions we're talking about, accredited versus unaccredited. We do have some not-for-profits, as you see, versus for-profits. And in fiscal year 23, these institutions served 61,000 students. We just got the data on October 15th for fiscal year 24, and we are working on it. And these are the credentials that were earned in FY23 from the institutions that attended authorized institutions. That's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions of Dr. Bellard Chase in regard to the authorization rule revision that's been proposed here?
Dr. Bellard Chase, thank you so much for the presentation. Appreciate the work that you all do. Is there an opportunity here for, well, let me preface this with this, recognizing that of the 266 institutions, only 8 you held conversations with.
We had conversations with 10.
10, okay.
And one made an official statement at the hearing in support. Yes, sir.
Okay. So clearly a small number, no one's opposing. But I wonder, Dr. Gentile, is there an opportunity for transparency that would allow us to disclose how the funds are being utilized, the services that are being provided, so that there is no concern about the need for the increase or the revenue as itself?
Okay, so I'm trying to make sure I understood your question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out whether there's an opportunity to provide information on a regular basis as a public agency. Do we already show how what services are being provided and how the funds are being used?
Well, we do have a robust website, yes, sir, where all of the statistical data reports are posted. When we do the training, we gave the institutions updates. They call us all the time, we meet with them. So when you say what we're doing, you mean like the daily functions that I went over, or?
Well, the expenses that really are attributed to this program. Obviously, we're raising the fees for a reason,
Yes,
right?
sir.
We're eating into the reserves, so it's not self-funding. And so what I'm thinking is that if we are able to demonstrate annually how much it costs us to operate the services and how that's directly funded from the fees that we're charging.
So Commissioner Stafford, making a public, perhaps a report or something we send out to our institutions that we authorize, breaking down our costs?
Yeah, or making it available on the website, either one.
And I would tell you, we do
think
have
it's-
the information. We have a chart that goes back from 2009, and it shows our above the line and our below the line. And the above the line has really only increased because when we get a statewide increase for insurance, COLA, for instance, below the line it's relatively steady, but if STS charges us more for our data management system or something like that. So we've been very frugal with the money. We haven't added anybody or any services. It's just every time everybody else in the state gets a pay increase or the insurance goes up, that comes along with us. But our fees were made so low in 2016, we haven't been able to catch back.
So to that question, I believe that's something we can make transparent, but I've learned whenever I have a question mark, I should turn to my general counsel and say, is there anything barring us from putting something like that on our website or sending out to be transparent about the costs?
Director Gentile, I think we can be as transparent as we'd like to be in sharing that, and certainly making every effort to be in direct communication with those that are regulated. Rulemaking hearings are very helpful, and we're not required to do that, but all those steps have been taken. There are potentially additional steps we could take, and you could even attempt to convene those institutions and receive more information and feedback from them. That is an option.
So Commissioner Stafford, to your point, in your request, we can make this more transparent on our website and then in our outreach, and consider also other steps to do so as well.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And just for added note, every institution that's authorized by us and some other constituents will sit the rulemaking hearing and give an opportunity, and we let them know up front, hey, we're changing the fees and this is why. So it wasn't just filed with the Secretary of State, it was actually emailed to each institution.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments in regard to Dr. Ballard Chase's presentation here? If not, the chair would entertain a motion with respect to the post-secondary state authorization rule revisions that are proposed.
I have one quick comment, sir. I just,
Yes.
if I may, I just feel like in this inflationary environment with what other family members and students are having to deal with in terms of rising costs and increased expenses, I'm going to regretfully have to not vote for this time. And I appreciate the committee's consideration. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Sure. All right, very good then. All right, the chair will move adoption of the post-secondary state authorization rule revision as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Commissioner Stafford. Any further comments or discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Hitt, call the roll on the motion to adopt.
Commissioner Matlock,
Yes.
Commissioner Rader,
Nay.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.
Aye. Okay. The vote is 3 ayes, 1 no. So we will proceed and it's adopted. And then the next item on our
Thank
agenda
you.
is other business. We'll ask if there's any other business to come before the committee at this point. All right, seeing none, any final comments from our Executive Director, Dr. Gentile?
No other comments, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, then, Chair moves that we adjourn. Is there a second? Second. All right, we have a second. Ms. Hitt, call the roll on the motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Matlock,
Yes.
Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.